Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Here we are, right back in the heart of London. My name is Magnus Nielsen, otherwise known as Lord Londonstone. And what I'm doing at the present moment is pointing my camera towards the great iconic landmark, not only of London, but the whole of Britain. The landmark which is commonly known as Big Ben, although Big Ben, strictly speaking, if we're going to be particular, is really the name of the bell in that clock, which you can't actually see. The tower itself was renamed the Elizabeth Tower in 2012 to mark the 60th anniversary of the Queen's accession. And it is some 316 feet tall, that's 96 meters if you think in meters. And it's recently been restored. During the 1990s, when they were doing some work to create the underground station, they thoughtfully started pumping huge quantities of cement into the foundations to prevent its leaning. But anyway, this tower was part of the complex known as the Houses of Parliament, or the Palace of Westminster, which was completed in the 1850s, 1859, and when it was eventually rehung in that year, it was the most accurate clock in the whole world. It was accurate to 1 second every 24 hours. Of course, these days there are clocks which are very much more accurate than that, and there have been clock towers in New Palace Yard ever since 1290. But this was the latest iteration of a clock tower on the House of Parliament. Now, to get up to the bell called Big Ben, you have to climb by way of 334 steps all the way from pavement level. They have recently installed a lift, or an elevator, which is not very large, as I recall, but it is possible to get up there. Also, might be interested to know that there's a prison cell somewhere within the clock tower, and that is kept there for members of Parliament who misbehaved during the parliamentary debates. The last time it was used was in 1880 to imprison a man called Charles Bradlaugh, who was an atheist and who refused to take the oath of loyalty to Queen Victoria on the Bible, because he said it was against his religious principles, or lack of religious principles. But anyway, if you look all the way up there, you'll see the clock tower, this highly distinctive building. Right at the top, they light the Ayrton light when Parliament, or the House of Commons at least, is sitting. So if you come by here and you see a light shining out from the very top of this tower, you'll know that Parliament is in session, even during the small hours of the morning. Right, what I'm going to do now is make my way over and talk a bit more about Parliament and about the building. And that means that I have to walk down here, and we've done this before many times, and I'm just walking now past the people. Perhaps I could even turn this round just to show you my face just for a change. How about that then? It's a lovely, warm, sunny September day, the 25th, Thursday, and here I am, and as I walk down you can see the House of Parliament in the background. Can I get that in? Just about. Yes, I can. So, as I say, the clock tower is the most striking landmark that represents Britain. You see this actually now in different parts of the world. They have a very similar structure in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. It's rather larger, but it overshadows the Kaaba in that city, the shrine, the holy shrine. And also they have replicas of the clock tower in parts of China and maybe other parts of the world as well. Anyway, we can now cross since we have the green light, and I really only am comfortable about crossing the road when we do have a green light. This is so that we can get a lot closer to the building. Right, there we go. So, just take you up here a bit. And we have these high railings and trees which are obscuring the view that I want to make. The view of Westminster Hall, and I don't know whether I'm going to get a good view here. I'm probably not. I'll do what I can though. Oh yes, let's just have a look at this and just see where we're going. Right. Okay. Right, what we're looking at now is the north end of Old Westminster Hall. This is really now all that remains of the new Palace of Westminster. When I say the new palace, I mean the palace that was built originally for King William II way back in the year 1100. So behind that frontage you have Westminster Hall, and it was certainly the largest building around here. You had the new Palace Hall, you had the old palace which was on the far side, and that was the palace that was built by Edward the Confessor. It was a large building. You had the Abbey, which is also another large building, and then you didn't really have large buildings until you got to the City of London, see St Paul's Cathedral. Anyway, it was built all those years ago, even though it's called the New Palace, 900 years ago, more than 900 years ago now. And it was used for all sorts of occasions, like coronation banquets. It used to be said after the king was crowned in Westminster Abbey, there'd be an enormous banquet laid on for him here. And it was here that the king's champion used to ride into the banquet while it was in progress and throw down the gauntlet and said, if anybody challenges this man's right to be the king, he'll have to meet me in battle. And very wisely, most people didn't take up the challenge. In 1295, it became the setting for the model parliament. That was the occasion when the king, Edward I, drew together the members from the House of Peers. They were called the peers at that time. They were equals, although some were more equal than others. These were the lords of the realm and the bishops and the abbots, and also the knights and the burgesses from the towns and the shires. And there were at that time 120 peers and 336 knights and burgesses met here all together. And then the lords didn't like that arrangement because they thought that they would be outvoted, so they argued that they had to be separated from the common people, and that when legislation was being considered, both houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, would have to agree on that legislation before the legislation could then be sent up to the king for his approval. That was the thinking. So it's been a place for royal banquets, royal occasions. It's been a case for Parliament, although, as I say, Parliament eventually divided into two separate houses. It was then becoming a law court, the most important law court for the most important trials in the country. And we had trials like Sir William Wallace, the Braveheart. He was tried here in 1305. We also had Sir Thomas More, who was the Chancellor to Henry VIII. He got on the wrong side of Henry VIII by refusing to accept the Act of Supremacy, which effectively made the division between the Roman Catholic Church and the English Church. King Charles I was put on trial in Westminster Hall in January of 1649. That was the event at the end of our Civil War. And he was accused of high treason for having started the Civil War, and he just simply refused to plead. He didn't accept the authority of the court to try him. But eventually they found him guilty, and he was sentenced to be beheaded. And the beheading took place outside banqueting house, as I've mentioned before on previous occasions. Since then, as I say, the law courts moved out here in the 1880s and moved off to the Strand, and since then the hall has been used as a place for state, lying in state for kings and queens. We've had the latest of these, of course, is our own Queen Elizabeth II, who's coffin lay in state here in the days before her funeral in Westminster Abbey. That was in September of 2002. So what I'm going to do now is just make my way round. It's not easy to see Parliament these days because of the problems which arose from terrorism, but there's always been attacks made on the building. In 1979, if you look through here, there is actually the members of Parliament. Their car park, a man called Airy Neve, was blown up by the IRA. They planted a bomb in his car, and ever since then the police have been extremely nervous about terrorism, so they're taking all the precautions. So it's not an easy building to approach or to get into as it once upon a time it used to be. And I can remember as a child, but a teenager, going to see the debates in the House of Commons. It was quite easy to get into in those days, but not now. So we're just walking down here. I mean, it is possible to get into the House of Lords and the House of Commons, but there's much more formality about it than now than there was then. Okay, just look down here. You will see, in remembrance of Police Constable Keith Palmer, who won the George Medal for his bravery. He was cut down here on the 22nd of March 2017 by a hooligan. Well, I say a hooligan, a religious hooligan, let's be specific. A religious hooligan, a nutcase, a nut job. Right, that's again the sort of thing why the police are upset and why they get themselves in a tizzy very often. So we'll carry on down here. Now I'm going to talk about, I've talked about Westminster Hall. Look at all these wiring precautions taken against terrorism, just to make certain that the people who govern us are properly protected. And what I need to do really is just talk a bit about the reform, how this was all brought up to date. Now, said you had the model Parliament of 1295. You had a clock tower in the precincts of the new Palace Yard in 1290. I think I've mentioned that one before. So the clock tower which you now see here is just a copy of the original. So Parliament, 1295. Centuries wore on and the landscape of England changed a great deal. We had what we called the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, which changed the way England, the population was distributed. We had the growth of industrial towns, places like Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Sheffield and so forth. And these places started complaining they didn't have proper representation. You also had, of course, the addition of countries like Scotland and Ireland. So the House of Commons was swollen with all sorts of other members of Parliament. And on top of all that, each different places used to have different ways of electing their member of Parliament. And in addition to that, you had some members of Parliament used to belong to what they called pocket boroughs. In other words, the land which gave the entitlement to vote was owned by a member of the House of Lords, and he could more or less control who became the member of Parliament for that given constituency. So in those days, I say there were only 3%, maybe 2.5% of the population, 1 in 40 adults actually had the right to vote, which of course a lot of people started protesting about. So there was a great movement for reform, which eventually saw the light of day in 1831. They produced a reform bill which was going to really sort of smooth out and try and put some sort of sense and order into parliamentary representation and extend the vote a bit. And the Lords didn't like that. They rejected the legislation, and then they tried again. And then the Prime Minister, a man called Grey, went to the king and asked if he could create 50 new peers. The king refused, so there was a general election and the whole thing became a major issue, and eventually there was a new parliament that was convened simply for the purpose of reform, and eventually the Lords very wisely backed down and they went through and they had the Reform Act of 1832. And when they had that Reform Act, they really started clearing out a lot of the building. They found a great deal of the old accounts had been kept on what they called tally sticks, and these went all the way back to the Middle Ages. I mean, it was just cluttering up the place, so they put them in a great big furnace, and unfortunately the fire got out of control and burnt down the old palace, which is a bit of a shame really. Fortunately they spared the Westminster Hall, but the old House of Commons and the old House of Lords and all the other royal buildings were completely destroyed. So they then put the whole thing out to tender to get architects to completely redesign the Houses of Parliament, which they did. And the job was awarded to a man called Sir Charles Barry, who designed the basic outline of the building, and the decorative detail was then added by another man called Augustus Pugin, and he decorated the building in what they called Flemish Gothic. We might call it Belgian Gothic today, but it's not English Gothic. It's rather more elaborate than English Gothic, but at any rate, this is how the new House of Parliament started. Work started in 1840, and it carried on and it wasn't really until around about 1858 that things were ready. Sorry, 1852. They were still adding touches to it for years afterwards. It wasn't really until 1888 that they really did the last few touches. So we had the Reform Act of 1832. People are still not happy with that, so they had another Reform Act in 1868. That was to for the benefit of the urban working class in this country, and they rose the number of people who were entitled to vote to 13%. And then they had another Reform Act in 1884, and that was for the benefit of the rural working class. So they rose the votes, the number of people entitled to vote, to 25. And that was, of course, for men. Women weren't allowed to vote at that time, but there was a considerable agitation for votes for women, and in 1918 they produced an Act of Parliament which gave the vote to women over the age of 28. By that time it had taken in 75% of all adults, and then that was 10 years later, 1928, all women over the age of 21 had the right to vote. And they also they removed the property qualifications which they used to have, because before this you couldn't really vote unless you had owned certain pieces of land worth enough to make it worth your while to vote. But then they've just really gave the right to vote to people rather than landowners. So I'm going to make my way down here just to show you the House of Parliament. We're going past all these high railings now, which I just think is a bit sad really, because it spoils the view that we once had. As we do go down here, you can see we've seen this before. Henry VII's chapel there over on the right, and the church there, the Church of St Margaret in Westminster. I've covered that previously, and I've also covered King Charles I looking out over the street towards this man, who was Oliver Cromwell, the leader of the new model army in the 1650s, and he was the man who was instrumental in getting the head of King Charles I cut off and setting up eventually his own government, his own military dictatorship, which really only lasted for about 5 years until he died. And then they didn't know exactly what to do. Would his son become the next Lord Protector? His son really wasn't up to the job, so eventually they had to bring back the king, the monarchy, back in the shape of King Charles II, and that was in 1660. Anyway, we will continue down here just for the purpose of showing you what this building looks like from the streets. And I'm a great believer, as you can see for yourself, in just giving you all sorts of raw and uncut footage just to see what it's like for it to be just an ordinary Londoner or a visitor to London walking around. This here is St Stephen's entrance, which doesn't look as if it's actually being used at the moment and probably won't be used again. The way you get into the House of Parliament now is through this very, very tightly controlled visitors entrance, and they will no doubt search you and frisk you and make certain you're not carrying bombs or acid or anything of that nature before they actually let you into the building. And you've got people there, and I can see police with guns who are ready to fire on anybody who might also be stupid enough to be carrying on guns. But anyway, this is St Stephen's entrance, and if you were to enter here and go straight through, you go straight into what used to be the Chapel of St Stephen, which was a chapel in the new palace. Of course, it was the old palace, and it was then turned into the House of Commons. It was sort of deconsecrated, as it were, and it was used for hundreds of years as the premises for the House of Commons. And of course, it all burnt down in 1834. So they maintained the what they now call St Stephen's Hall, and that led directly into the lobby. And you had the House of Commons leading then over on the left, and then the House of Lords leading over on the right to face it. Now you've got something like 1,100 rooms in this building. It covers 8 acres, and there are 11 courtyards in total and 100 flights of stairs. When it was built, it was of course considered to be a highly remarkable piece of work, as you can imagine. The Tsar of Russia called it a dream in stone. He was very, very impressed with it. Of course, what they did forget to do was put in things like toilets, and so you just had to be very, very self-disciplined in those days. I think that was really the secret to it. But anyway, going down here, you can see the part of the House of Parliament which is now really dedicated to the Lords. Now, originally the Lords were not only the hereditary peers, they were bishops as well, bishops of the Church of England. And they had, their numbers eventually grew and grew. There were 350 of them originally in 1800, and then there were 600 peers and lords by 1900, because Queen Victoria rather liked to create peers. But of course, if you have a peerage, that meant that you bestowed your title on your son, and he would be then unable to sit in the House of Commons, and people began to feel that really the power, real power, was within the House of Commons rather than in the Lords. So also, because the Lords were the great landowners, an Act of Parliament was introduced in 1910 by one of our Prime Ministers, a man called Lloyd George, who very heavily taxed land, and the Lords objected to this. So again, there was another general election, and the powers of the Lords to delay bills were severely reduced to about a year or so, 2 years I think it was, and that was again reduced in 1961 to about a year. They then brought in what they called life peers. Now, a life peer was just simply an ordinary member of the public, or it would be not unusually, it would have been somebody like a member of Parliament who would then, at the end of his career, would be given a life peerage, which meant to say that he could sit in the House of Lords and sort of carry on the job that he'd been doing. And there were a number of life peers, but this sort of brought the size of the House of Lords up to about 800. It was actually the largest legislature in the world. And things moved on, as I say, in time, and people started to object, and they started calling for more reform. So in 1998, They reformed Parliament again. They got rid of all the, not all the hereditary peers. 92 of them remain, but the rest is all. Now this has always been a problem because nobody knows exactly what to do with it. Do they want to have lords that are democratically elected? And if they do democratically start electing their lords, that's going to affect the legitimacy of the House of Commons. Or do you just have lords who are appointed by the Prime Minister or some other body? But that's not really a satisfactory situation either. So at the present moment we're open. We just don't really know how this one is going to play itself out. I'm coming down here because what I want to do, maybe I won't go all the way down there, I don't think it's a good idea now, just to show you the Victoria Tower. And you can see, oh, if I go around here, I think you'll probably get a better view.
That's very...
If I go around here, you can see the Victoria Tower, and right at the top of the tower you may be able to see the flag as well. That's our national flag. Most people call it the Union Jack. It's really should be called the Union flag. It's only the Union Jack when it flies from the jackstaff of a ship. But anyway, we all know what it is. It's the national flag of Britain. And that flag is large enough to cover a tennis court. And this building here, Victoria Tower, and the Victoria Tower was built and completed in 1856. And at that time, it was the 316 feet. It was the tallest tower, tallest four-square, now be careful how I express this, tallest four-square building in the world. Of course, there were taller spires on cathedrals around the world, especially in Europe, but that was the tallest four-square building. They could have built it taller, but they didn't have any lifts or elevators in those days, so they didn't think it was actually advisable to build it any taller than it is now. They might have done if they had lifts and elevators, but those things didn't really come until the very end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, and they were used extensively in New York. That's why we have the skyscrapers there. But this was, for a while, it was the tallest four-square building in the world. It's also, you can see there more clearly, the Sovereign's entrance. Now this is where the King comes in his coach on those special occasions when he comes to open Parliament, right up here in his coach, and then he makes his way from, oh sorry, I'm being pushed on, I beg your pardon, there we go. The King comes here and eventually enters the building, and then he opens up the session in the House of Lords, and he sits on the throne. We have the throne of this country is actually in the House of Lords. That's where he sits, and he delivers his speech to Parliament. It's called the King's Speech, and it's really setting out the legislative programme of the government. The speech is written for the King. It's not something which he makes up by himself anyway. But there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. And it's now all very, very secure. So if you're a terrorist and you want to blow it all up, you're going to have problems. It wouldn't be like this in the days of Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was the man who attempted to blow up Parliament in 1605. For several weeks he had been storing gunpowder in the cellars underneath the House of Lords, which were then actually, these cellars were actually open to the public. They were much less formal about it than they are now. And he could do that, and then he was discovered, and eventually he was executed here, would you believe, of all places, in what is Old Palace Yard. And there, through the railings, if I can just show you, is the statue of Richard I on horseback, which stood in the Great Exhibition of 1851. So it's all quite formidable now. It sort of separates the people from the lawmakers, which are probably dubious advantages really. But there we are. These are now the times in which we live, and we have to move with them. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. I've gone on for half an hour, and I think that's quite enough for one video, and I'll be happy to see you in the next one. So I shall say over and out for the time being. If you've enjoyed this or find this helpful, then please give me a like, and if you haven't, or you have, a nice comment, of whether you've liked it or not, would also be very useful for me to know what sort of videos you would like from me. As I say, what I propose to do now, or propose to do in later videos, is to carry on my explorations of London, just showing what London is like in the 2020s. But as I say, I think we've seen enough, and for the time being I shall now say over and out. Bye bye for now, everyone.